All right, folks, we're going to get started. My name is Ian Andrews. I'm the Executive Director at LakewoodAlive. Thank you very much for being here tonight. This is a forum talking about equality in Lakewood, the LGBT community, and is this community treated fairly in Lakewood? Is there equality? Is it a myth that we are the LGBT capital, if you will, of the world that was always in the monopoly game that everyone refers to from years ago? Who knows? And so we want to talk about some of these issues tonight, but as some brief background before I get to that, some thanks to Mr. Jim Crawford and the staff here at the Lakewood Public Library for hosting. Jim and his team have done a really nice job. So. I'd also like to thank our board of directors who have helped to put this on. Specifically, we have a community engagement committee comprised of Cindy Einhaus, the chair. She is the executive director at Beck Center for the Arts. Jim Crawford here at the library. Sean McDermott, past board president. So thanks very much to the committee, and thanks also to several board members who are here tonight, Pam Smith and Patty Ryan. I appreciate them being here and the board's support to move forward with this forum, and we want to move forward with many others. I also appreciate the help from our staff. Ken Brand is our marketing and event director. He's here as well tonight. LakewoodAlive, we've been around for 11 years. I'll be very brief about this, but we are kind of a hybrid between an economic development organization and a community development corporation. We are a community-based organization here to strengthen the local economy, improve quality of life. We do that through our Main Street program. You know, a lot of our special events like the Meltdown, Light Up Lakewood, Spooky Pooch Parade, Wine and Craft Beer Festival. We also have a design committee that works to improve the aesthetic feel of the downtown district. Spooky Pooch is ridiculous. It's crazy.
It's serious Guinness Book World Record.
It's pretty ridiculous. People go nuts. They do. They go nuts. We also have a merchant association, the Downtown Lakewood Business Alliance. They work together to further improve the downtown district and make it a more attractive place for businesses to want to locate and then keep them here in Lakewood. We really believe in small businesses. I grew up in a family of a small business owner, and so I'm very passionate about local small businesses. We also have a housing outreach program working primarily with low to moderate income individuals to improve the exterior condition of their home. If my home's falling apart, it's going to affect everybody around me on that street, not just myself, but everybody nearby. And so we work with these folks to help to stabilize our housing stock, because housing is the foundation of the local economy. We have wonderful housing stock. We've got to be able to keep it going. So how can we empower people, connect them to resources, and move Lakewood forward? Before I continue on, I also neglected to mention we have some elected officials in the room. Councilwoman Cindy Marks is here, and Councilman Sam O'Leary. So thank you very much for being here. So back to the original line, we are here to strengthen the local economy, improve quality of life. And I think that's what we're here to talk tonight about, is how do we improve the local economy, make sure that we are a welcoming community. Diversity is an easy thing to say. People can say they like diversity. Well, that's easy. Do you really appreciate diversity? Do you really want to live in a community and work in a community where you're with people who are different than you? And I think that's really important. And so we want to have a great conversation tonight. I'm really pleased with the panel that we have. They're going to introduce themselves momentarily, but it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce Michelle Tomallo. She is going to be our moderator. Brief background, she's the president and co-founder of Fit Technologies, which founded in 1999 as an IT company based out of Cleveland that offers managed IT to businesses and organizations and can customize a plan to meet specific client needs. She also is the president of the board at Plexus, which is the Chamber of Commerce for the LGBT community and allies. And Plexus serves the LGBT business community and advocates workplace equality issues in Northeast Ohio. Plexus is a strategic partner in the economic development of Northeast Ohio and serves as a point of connection for corporations, supporters, LGBT businesses, and professionals. And a little interesting side note, Plexus means a structure in the form of a network or a combination of interlaced parts. And I think that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is how this is all interconnected. And the strength of our region is really kind of the focus, and how do we embrace everyone, embrace diversity, but also embrace a really strong economy to be vibrant. So without further ado, Michelle Tomallo.
For all of you for being here tonight as well. And I also wanted to say that I'm a proud Lakewood resident for about 9 years, so this is great to be back. And really proud of the community, so delighted to be here to have this conversation. So to tell just a little bit about how this conversation started and why we're here talking today this evening is, so how many of you have played Trivial Pursuit? A lot of you. So do you remember that question? Again, there's some thought that, was it a real question or was it lore? But the question went something like this: which city has the largest per capita gay population in the US? And of course, playing that game that would drive our family kind of crazy, many people of course would say Minneapolis or San Francisco or all of those sort of things. But the rumor is, and I feel like I remember that card, but does anyone else remember that card?
I do.
All right. So it said Lakewood, Ohio. So how about that? So there was some conversation within the chamber about that question and the idea of is that legend, is that lore true? And so Cindy gave me a call and we were talking a little bit about that, and then we were having conversations within Plexus about that. We were having conversations with the Small Business Majority about that. We were having conversations with Equality Ohio about community conversations, and so it seemed like a perfect opportunity to have tonight's conversation. So we don't know for certain whether that card exists, and that will be one of your homework assignments that will remind you as you leave of someone will need to go and find that, and maybe there'll be a Lakewood prize package for you. But whatever that is, we're glad that it sparked the idea for this conversation tonight. And we're going to spend probably the next hour or so talking about how well Lakewood is doing in terms of attracting lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender individuals and families. Is the community affirming to LGBT individuals? And we're going to also talk about the idea of how we, as neighbors, as business owners, as consumers, as civic leaders, what are we doing? What can we do to, have the impact that we want to have in Lakewood in terms of being welcoming? And before we introduce the panel, I wanted to put just a little bit of context around this conversation and the relevance of this. Is that Michaela and I just flew back from DC, and we have been there for 2 days with small business owners, as well as thought leaders and policymakers in DC. And while our focus was about business issues, it was clear that the theme was about how do we engage and grow thriving communities. And I think that that's what's so critical to why we're having the conversation, because even though our focus is about LGBT, it really is about how are we creating economic opportunities, how are we creating thriving communities, and how do we just impact quality of life here. So with that said, I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves.
Thanks, Michelle. My name is Alana Jochum. I'm the Northeast Ohio Director for Equality Ohio. And Equality Ohio is the statewide LGBTQ education and advocacy organization working for statewide change, improving our laws and the lived equality here in Ohio.
Maureen Greeves, 20-year resident of Lakewood, and my wife and I have 2 children at home, Mia and Gabby, and they attend Roosevelt Elementary. And I wanted to thank Cindy for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the parent and resident of Lakewood on this panel.
Hello, my name is Michael Daso. I'm a small business owner here in Lakewood. We have 4 employees. My wife and I live in Lakewood as well. And we have 4 kids that go, 1 at the high school, 1 at the middle school, and 2 in grade school here in Lakewood. So I'm here to represent the small business community inside Lakewood.
I'm going to be a little longer. Mostly because a lot of folks haven't heard of our organization, Small Business Majority, but my name's Michaela Burriss, and I'm actually originally a resident from Northeast Ohio, but I currently live and reside in Columbus, Ohio, representing Small Business Majority on a statewide level as our Ohio Outreach Manager. And essentially, Small Business Majority is a national nonprofit that was founded and run by small business owners with the goal of engaging the public policy and government officials in conversation from the business community in a very pragmatic way. We certainly believe that business owners feel, and our research and data shows, that government has a role to play in changing and shaping our economy and making it thrive, making us all have a little bit more money in our pockets, investing in our communities, and creating jobs. So one of the things that we're doing, is trying to make sure that there's a pragmatic small business voice as it pertains to statewide workplace non-discrimination. So we've been having conversations like this throughout the state of Ohio, not only gauging small business owners and their perspectives on issues like workplace non-discrimination, but also to educate and let folks know what the current pulse is in terms of state government and what legislation is or is not taking place and what their role might be in trying to shape those conversations. So I'm here, of course, to provide information about our role and what small business owners think, but also to hopefully learn a little bit from all of you and the business community here in Lakewood.
Excellent. And we're going to have some conversation with the panel, but if you are thinking of questions, please keep those in your mind, and then we're going to have some Q&A about 8 o'clock, and you'll get a chance to ask those questions. And for any of you who are tweeting, you can use hashtag LGBT Lakewood as part of that. So,
especially with photos. I don't want pictures of me on the internet I can't find. Please let me search it.
A woman near and dear to my own heart. I know. Anyway. So one of the things, when we have community conversations like this, I think that it's helpful to define some of the terms that we may hear tonight. And so I was going to ask Alana to explain some of those, and also when we're used to saying LGBT as if it's one word, but I think that that's an important piece to remember, that when we're using that phrase, we are talking about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender individuals, and so we're used to hearing it as one word, but I wanted to just say that again because sometimes I think we blend it all together.
Sure, I'm happy to provide an explanation that is not my own. It was the best explanation that I've heard so far, and it's from Dr. Henry Ain, who is at Metro Health. If you're familiar with Metro Health's Pride Clinic, he does incredible work and specializes with transgender patients. So I credit him. And
can you speak up? I can't hear you.
sure, I'll bring the microphone a little closer. How about that? Great. So I'm going to talk about a couple different concepts: sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. Like Michelle said, we tend to jumble LGBT all together, but in fact it's talking about different concepts. When we think of sex, think of biology, usually what a doctor assigns a person at birth. And this is often based on genitalia, but not always. It can be based on chromosomes, and sometimes we can't tell a person's sex based on their genitalia or chromosomes. Then we have gender identity. Gender identity is when I close my eyes and I think about myself. How do I identify myself? What is in my mind? How do I feel? Do I feel feminine? Do I feel masculine? Do I feel something in between? Do I feel neither? Gender identity reflects on a person's inner sense of identity. Oftentimes, sex and gender identity align. We all have a sex and a gender identity. And when they align, we call that cisgender. And sometimes they don't align. And when there's a disconnect and they don't align, we call that transgender. And oftentimes, transgender individuals work to express their gender identity. So gender expression is actually how a person expresses their inner gender identity. Often we think of the type of clothing a person wears. Perhaps they wear feminine clothing, or masculine clothing, or neutral clothing because they feel binary. They feel as if they are neither gender. Finally, I want to turn us to sexual orientation, which is completely separate from what I've just talked about. Sexual orientation refers to attraction. Who do you love? And that is where people who may identify as being attracted to the opposite sex, we think of that as heterosexual or straight, or to the same sex, lesbian or gay, or to both sexes, bisexual. So that's just a quick overview of the terminology that we're going to be discussing here tonight.
Through some of our answers there. So to get us started, and this is a question for the whole panel, is when you think of the term welcoming, what do you think that means for those as neighbors, as consumers, as business people? What do you think of when you think of the word welcoming, or what does that look like to you?
I'll start. So 20-year resident of Lakewood. So as we had talked about, having some discussions earlier, we had talked about the fact that I have kind of experienced all of Lakewood in the various phases of my life, right? I've been single in Lakewood, I've been coupled in Lakewood, and now I'm married with children in Lakewood. And organically, that idea of welcoming has changed for me, right? So when I first moved here, I thought welcoming in the terms of, you know, what I wanted to socially, how this community was going to welcome me socially, how I was going to feel comfortable, was I going to feel safe, and then it transferred. It grew organically into, now I'm with my partner Kelly, and how does that feel for us together as a unit? Or do we feel safe? Do we feel welcoming? And now, of course, the final transition, and well, hopefully not the final one, but one of the next steps is, okay, now organically, my definition of welcoming has definitely changed. Right now, I have a family that, you know, I want to make sure is safe. I want to make sure they grow up proud, right? So that's definitely changed for me. And Lakewood has proven itself to be true in that respect. We have had wonderful experiences as a family unit, and with as I'm speaking from a parent in the Lakewood school system, Roosevelt Elementary and the school system have been phenomenal with welcoming our family and supporting our family and making our family feel safe and proud. So that's been a wonderful experience. Great, thanks.
If I can go next, I'd say as a small business owner, it's interesting in terms of, and in fact I have a specific story. About 7 years ago, there was a gay couple in Lakewood that felt very uncomfortable with their financial advisor. We do financial planning. And it was another advisor at my company. And they contacted the regional president and asked to be reassigned to another advisor within our company. So I found that very interesting. And fortunately, the branch manager reached out to me and said, Mike, would you be willing to meet with this couple and help them with their financial planning? And so to me, welcoming is dealing with not only being open to dealing with that couple, but also for me to educate myself and learn about what unique planning issues they might have. There were beneficiary designations, there were benefits at work, there were a lot of issues that came up that I had to be comfortable to ask from a fact-finding standpoint to be able to do my job. So for me, welcoming, it was really twofold. It was being comfortable in dealing with the clients, and then also what do I need to learn to educate myself in being able to do the best job I can as a financial planner. So that's what I would say in terms of being welcoming.
When you were talking with that couple, how did they articulate how that felt when they were dealing with that other planner, and then like what was their thought process to, you know, make that call? What was some of the, do you remember some of the emotion of that, or the things that they said, or?
Actually, they've shared a lot more with me over the years as we've gotten to know each other and become a little bit more comfortable in the whole process. It was a hard phone call to make, though. I think there was a certain hesitancy in bringing up the issue, and am I going to have an X on my file? You know, I could sense there was a certain hesitancy there to even bring it up in the first place. But as we've gotten to know each other a lot better over the years, it was frustrating. There was a lot of anxiety, I think, in dealing with that whole situation, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess what I would add to that is, and Michael really outlays at least a great component of what we mean by welcoming from a small business perspective when we're talking about consumers. But when I think about small business majority's role and what it means to be welcoming from an economic perspective on a statewide level, we mean consumers, we mean business owners, we mean employees. So when we talk about policies that impact whether or not we're saying out to the world, please come here. We want you to make an investment here. We want you to bring your jobs here. We want you to bring your money here. And more importantly, as business owners, they want to be able to retain the most talented workforce possible. So when we think about our LGBT community, and especially a state like Ohio where we have these really great institutions of higher learning, what you end up encountering is a lot of students might be attracted here to come here and learn, but do they want to stay in Ohio? And that concept of staying and leaving from a public policy perspective is really what I like to think of as meaning welcoming. And especially, you know, thinking about it from an economic perspective, you know, we want you to spend money here, we want you to make investments here, because if you do so, we won't negatively impact you.
Of course, if all of you are going through that, I'm thinking like lots and lots of questions to interject there. Elena, talk a little bit about the welcoming piece, and then one of the things that I also wanted to have you share a little too was around language, because I think that the idea of how language helps people understand that you're not making necessarily assumptions about.
Oh, great,
them.
sure. I'll start there. I think not making assumptions is important. It's important for us to not assume a person has a wife if they are male, or that they have a husband if they are female. Talk in terms of spouses, or talk in terms of partners, because unfortunately Ohio is one of 13 states that does not recognize marriage equality yet. We are hoping that that will change this summer, but we do not currently have the ability to get married here in Ohio if you identify as LGBT. Welcome language really does matter, and not assuming a person's gender identity either. It is okay to approach a person and say, what is your preferred pronoun? That shows that you are aware and conscious of gender identity, and that you are respecting that person's self-identification. It is perfectly okay to ask that question. Or if you don't know a person's gender identity and you do know their name, use their name. Or try to avoid labeling a person's gender identity right from the beginning. So I think that is, you're so right to say language matters, because that's a way each of us in this room can make a conscious but subtle change in the way that we interact with each other, and can be more welcoming individually.
And if I could add to that, our studies show that when employees are happy and welcomed and enjoy the places that they work in, they're far more likely to be productive. So again, going back to that economic argument where you're asking folks, you know, why is it important for me to have workplace non-discrimination policies within my workplace, or have gender-neutral bathroom facilities? If your employees enjoy being there, they're going to work a lot harder for you. And if you're a business owner and you're out there trying to make money and to grow, you want to be surrounded by folks who are really invested in the mission that you're trying to accomplish. So productivity has a lot to do with happiness, and it's an economic argument, even though we're talking about predominantly social issues.
Well, I don't know if you want me to go into this here. So I, like Michaela, care deeply about policy. Equality Ohio focuses on statewide policy, and how can we be more welcoming as a state, and how can we help municipalities be more welcoming as municipalities. Currently in Ohio, we are one of 29 states that does not have inclusive non-discrimination protections for the LGBT community at the statewide level. There have been many bills introduced over the last 9 years. We are constantly working at this, and we are lucky here in Lakewood to have two wonderful advocates at the state legislature. Senator Skindell and Representative Antonio are constantly fighting for LGBT equality in numerous ways: non-discrimination protections, hate crimes, anti-bullying, everything. So we're very grateful to be able to work with them on these issues. But in the absence of statewide protections, one of the ways cities can show that they are welcoming is by having local protections in place. Non-discrimination ordinances in housing, in public accommodations, employment, having inclusive hate crime legislation for including LGBT individuals, and other policies, domestic partnership benefits. So I think what's interesting is that Lakewood as a city is very welcoming culturally and has made great strides legislatively, but still has some areas of improvement. Lakewood currently has fully inclusive protections in housing, in non-discrimination in the housing code. It has a hate crime, equivalent of a hate crime statute for local levels that is inclusive of the LGBT community, and some protections here and there across the code. Currently missing are public accommodations and employment. But what I know is great is that our council members here, Councilman O'Leary and Councilwoman Marks, are actually actively working to improve Lakewood's code to be fully inclusive of the LGBT community. I believe drafts are already in progress. Might it be okay to defer?
Absolutely.
I would love to. Captain O'Leary, and he's going to give a quick update on the most recent progress in this area.
Hi everyone, thanks again for having this great conversation tonight, and I am really happy to share with everyone that Councilwoman Marks and I, as well as our other council colleagues, are in the process, the early stages of getting things introduced. So we currently have a draft of new legislation that would really seek to modernize our code here in Lakewood and make sure that we're doing everything we can to be welcoming across those different areas. As Alana mentioned, Lakewood has for a long time had protections in place for housing issues, but public accommodation and employment are still two areas that we don't have protections in, and we'll look to remedy that with this piece of legislation that we're putting forward. Keep an eye out for that at the first meeting in June. We have a meeting on Monday, and then it'll be the next meeting after that that we'll look to have this on the docket. So I'm very excited about that. I look forward to the conversations that it'll bring. I think that, you know, in speaking to people about it, generally constituents and so forth, I think it's telling that a couple of things. One is that people are shocked when they find out that these protections aren't already in place. Yep. That's a statistic. I think it's something upwards of 70% of Ohioans are actually under the impression that you can't be fired for being gay. And unfortunately, that's not the case unless your municipality can step forward and help give those protections. So I think it's a really important role for us as a community to help make sure that our citizens feel welcome, and not just for the benefit of the individual citizens themselves, but for all of us in the community as employers, as co-workers, as friends and neighbors. As the panel has alluded to, it's such a multifaceted issue that it really touches on a lot of corners of people's lives, and I'm looking forward to having the legislation in place that will give those protections. So, I also, if I could, just want to very briefly give a shout out again. Cindy Marks has been incredibly helpful, my fellow councilwoman, as well as Dan O'Malley from Equality Ohio and Stonewall locally, as well as, I don't know if Helen Rapp is here tonight.
She's a wonderful legal intern who did some research.
Yes, yeah, she put together a wonderful memo for us, and I was really appreciative of that as well. So, thanks again.
Thank you.
I also wanted to underscore how, again, serendipitous and perfect the conversation and the timing of this was, because when we were first having this conversation back in February and thinking about, oh, we're going to have this happen in Lakewood, Alana said, I literally just got off the phone because I know that Stonewall Downs are working with Lakewood because they want to look at their ordinances because of this. Again, the spotlight on what what we've learned is that whether you're a business or even some of the municipalities, because language has evolved over a short period of time or even over a long period of time, the need to review what the ordinances say, what policies at our small businesses or within our organizations are. It's this imperative, and again, it was just a perfect timing of that work was already happening. So, and along those same lines, because there's several things that are happening here that we just touched on, maybe talk just a little bit about the other, like where Lakewood is in terms of municipalities within the state who've made these strides.
Sure, that's a great.
And where some work still needs to be done.
A great question. In the absence of statewide protections, we really live in a patchwork across Ohio, and depending on where you live depends on what protections the LGBT community has in place. There are 11 municipalities across Ohio right now that have fully inclusive non-discrimination protections in place. And when I say fully inclusive, what I mean is that it protects both sexual orientation and gender identity or expression. and it includes employment, housing, and public accommodations. So those are the areas we really try to capture our policy protections.
And Lakewood would be the happy dozen then, that would make a dozen.
Well, Lakewood will become a happy dozen, but I've got to tell you, I think Bexley, Ohio.
Yes.
Okay, well, we got a little competition.
Yeah, and maybe we continue to spur these competitions across Ohio.
Yes.
So it's been great to watch Bexley go through the process of creating a really comprehensive ordinance structure. They had actually no non-discrimination protections in place, nothing.
For anything.
For anything. And so this was a wonderful opportunity for them to put protections in place for a multitude of classes of people.
I think that this is a good opportunity to also bring up the fact that as parents within the Lakewood school system, we're very passionate about the fact that we'd like to see some changes made to school policy and to school handbooks to also incorporate that language into their information, right? So that we know that our students that go to those schools, our teachers that go to those schools, our parents that have children that go to those schools, or our parents that identify as LGBT, that they are comfortable and feel safe and feel confident in our school system and know that their families and their students and their teachers are protected. It's very important to us, for sure.
And Maureen, tell a little bit about when your kids were ready to go to school. How did you and Kelly handle that? Did you do something specific that other parents wouldn't? Did you meet with the principal? Did you, tell us a little bit about?
Oh, yes, Kelly is very active in the conversations with the schools, for sure. And she definitely set the groundwork and introduced our family and offered some language that people could use, students could use, the people within the school could use, just in case they weren't comfortable with that yet and they had not been exposed to that. Again, I will reiterate, though, that the experiences that we've had within the school system have been phenomenal to this date. But yeah, it was definitely a proactive approach to make sure that when we were ready to send the children, the girls to school, that we were having those conversations ahead of time.
Good point, too. Mike, share a little bit about, from your organization's perspective, when did your firm start looking at diversity and inclusion and looking at your policies and maybe some training and those types of things? When did that happen for your firm on a larger scale and here locally?
Yeah, it's interesting. AXA Advisors, I run a local business with 4 employees here in Lakewood, but I'm part of a national company that's based out of New York. And our parent company is even in Paris. So there's a much bigger organization above my organization here in Lakewood. And we go to a national conference every year. I've seen a lot of, I'd say probably in the last 4 to 5 years, I've seen a lot more emphasis on awareness and training. Use our financial planning software as an example. About 4 years ago, you go to input a husband and a wife in the financial planning software, and our company updated our software where it's now spouse in the financial planning software. And my guess is a lot of other companies have not gone to that type of acceptance and awareness with the applications that we're using within our company. Our database has changed, where we can make accommodations as well when all of our client data is inputted into our databases. And then I just returned from our national conference in California, and we had a breakout session on the LGBT community, things that our national company is doing to raise awareness. I got support from my region when I wanted, as a company, to support the Gay Games last year. There was a co-op with the region to help me with the sponsorship of that as well. So I've seen a lot of support from our company on a national level. But in my opinion, it's been probably in the last 4 to 5 years where I've seen a real change.
If I could share a story. So we've been having conversations with small groups of business owners from around the state. And we actually had a roundtable with folks from Equality Ohio in Athens. And there was a software company that shared with us that in creating their software, they used gender neutral terminology and left gender blank when people had to fill out their forms to be able to use their software. And the amount of feedback, positive feedback they received for just making that what might seem very minute step in a very progressive and positive direction has correlated into a lot of really positive business for them. So a lot of times in these closer subsets and communities, folks share with them, hey, did you know that this company is making a concerted effort to be aware of using gender neutral pronouns or allowing people to insert their own gender as they feel comfortable. And they've heard nothing but amazing things for taking that one step.
And we've heard similar stories where, again, there's not assumptions about because I'm a female that my spouse is male. And those types of things that are, again, very subtle but make such a difference in terms of the provision of services. So I want to go back a little bit to the statement that the councilman was saying about.
I feel like I know exactly what you're going to ask.
is to talk a little bit about the research that came out of, and again, I'm going to say surprising research, and even in our conversations and getting ready for the panel, and we're talking about some of what we wanted to have Michaela share, was Mike was saying, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I think that that's, again, why we're so interested in having these conversations, not only here in Lakewood, but in many other communities across Northeast Ohio. So I think that's
right. So I really appreciate the council member providing that snippet, because it's one that we share pretty often. And small business majority, as I mentioned, one of our goals is to be really representative of what the true pulse of small business perspectives are on public policy issues. So what we do very often is spend a lot of money to do some scientific research and polling, and it's not a polling of our network of business owners. We're not a chamber, so we're not a member organization, but we compose ourselves of a network of business owners who we've interacted with doing events like this. So what we'll do is a completely random sample. We'll ask them a lot of questions on certain issues, and when asking them questions about issues concerning workplace non-discrimination, whether it was gender identity or sexual orientation, we ended up discovering that 7 out of 10 small business owners here in Ohio were incredibly supportive. And furthermore, what we found out was only 4 out of 10 or 4 of those 7 who were supportive actually had workplace non-discrimination policies, which is quite a bit of a lack. But the most important little snippet that we probably got in terms of education and how we can take these steps towards really pulling in that workforce talent was actually when we asked the question of, did you know that on the state level that it is currently legal to fire, harass, bully somebody in the workplace as a result of being LGBT? And only 5% of the small business owners in our poll correctly identified that it is currently legal in Ohio to fire somebody for being LGBT. And that is, 5% is a very, I mean, the educational hurdles you have to take to reach out to business owners so that they even know that this is an advocacy issue is pretty substantial. So, you know, what we end up hearing when we have these business roundtables, well, if they don't know that it's, you know, currently legal to fire, harass, whatever it may be, then why should we care? They're probably not doing it. But usually when you take that kind of perspective, you're only thinking about it from the employer perspective. You're not thinking about it from the employee perspective. And as Michael mentioned, you know, when they have a small firm of 4 employees, you're gonna get really close. You get intimate. They feel like family to you. And again, it goes back to that productivity of your workforce. And if you are a talented employee and you could take yourself anywhere, you want to make sure that you're going to feel welcomed in working in that environment. So if you don't know that it's currently illegal and you're not having a workplace policy in place, if I'm interviewing to work for you, I might be reluctant to talk a little bit about who I am, or I might not be as productive in the workplace as a result of not feeling like I could tell you that over the weekend I married my same-sex partner in Massachusetts where it's legal. So, I mean, some of that research and polling is very telling, and it was a predominantly Republican sample. And as I'm sure Elena could elaborate, you know, this is a bipartisan issue, at least on the state level. So it has bipartisan support. And it's just a matter of really educating small business owners so that they can adequately engage and help our economy.
I was in the 95%. I wasn't aware, absolutely.
And when Ohio isn't open for business fully to everyone, as they are, it's not open to talent. We're not getting the best talent here. We're not keeping the talent who is coming here for our educational institutions. They're leaving afterwards to move to states that do accept the workforce as they are every day at work.
And I think the other thing that we've learned from some of the research too is that it's not just, oh, this is the only talent that we're losing are LGBT individuals. It's the idea that people who have a value of wanting to work in organizations or be part of communities or have neighbors that are going to be welcoming and supportive is a critical part of the decision making of where it is that you're working, again, where it is that you're living. So those are a key thing to keep in mind, that this isn't just about business owners, but it's a much broader piece of this, and it's not just LGBT individuals, it's a great many other folks.
If I could just share a quick anecdotal story that speaks directly to that. I'm an attorney as well, and I used to work at Squire Sanders, now Squire Patton Boggs, and I often still encourage people to work there, young associates who are looking at firms. And I recently was in conversation with a young gay man who has been married to his husband for 3 years. They live in DC currently. And he is a bright, talented attorney who has every reason to want to come to Ohio to work for Squire Patton Boggs, except that he said to me, why would I come to Ohio? I have a wonderful workplace non-discrimination policy in place at Squire, but the minute I leave my firm, I'm not respected by the state for who I am, and my husband is a legal stranger to me. What do you tell a person like that? We are losing talented people who want to be here, who want to be in our region, and don't feel welcomed here.
And interestingly enough, Central Ohio is a really good example of why statewide policy is so important, because here you have Columbus, the metropolitan area that's receiving a perfect score from HRC for its inclusiveness and policy. And then you have the suburb Bexley, which we mentioned. And to give you guys some historical context, Bexley made national news when an LGBT couple tried to solicit, I believe it was a videographer, to film their same-sex wedding, and the videographer refused their service because they didn't support same-sex marriage. So Bexley has been now suddenly at the cusp of trying to figure out, what does this mean for our community to not have these policies? You know, what kind of conversations do we have now? And, you know, somebody might be interested in working in Columbus, but where are they living? Or vice versa. Maybe somebody has a job here in Lakewood and is living in Cleveland. There's a lot of people who are moving across borders. So municipality action is an amazing first step. But when your state as a total is not recognizing you and providing those protections, it really becomes a changing game. You know, where am I at this exact moment, and what does that mean for me?
Maureen, I was going to ask you to share a little bit about when you were, when the kids went to school and you started to learn more about the policies within the school. How did you even learn about what some of the teachers were facing? Again, was that just part of your conversation around, this is introduction to your family, and that was just natural kind of questions that you asked, or did that come out later? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Has definitely been a recent thing, right? The conversations were more about our family, and as we got more comfortable with the school and closer to our teachers and the support, and Kelly volunteers at the school quite a bit and working with the students, that policy started to boil up, right? Where we said, you know, this is some, and when we think about Lakewood and we think about the things that you're talking about, attracting the next generation, the LakewoodAlive, keeping Lakewood vibrant, the new resident is a consumer of information. Right? They're not just going to talk to somebody and say, oh yeah, it's a great place to live. They're going to be doing some really serious research and consuming a lot of information and making educated decisions about where they're going to want to live and raise a family and grow and support a community. And having that policy in place, I think, is going to be very, very critical in order to attract those types of resident consumers of information when they're making their you know, picking their spots on the map that says, I want to end up here. I think that's going to be important for them to have that type of information available. For sure.
Well, once again, so you're talking about the school policies, because I'm under the impression that in Lakewood, with 4 kids in the school system, that I think there is a culture certainly a more accepting culture in Lakewood than a lot of other communities. That's the impression I have from my daughter who's at the high school. I don't know if there's any students here.
Culture's there, right?
I feel like there is a good culture of acceptance. My daughter was involved in marching band, and I had my kids in grade school at homecoming this last year, and there was I believe, an openly gay student who was elected to the homecoming court this year in Lakewood. And I saw a lot of support, particularly from the students in the marching band, for that student, and really a lot of people at that homecoming football game. So to me, I feel like there's a culture. It sounds like there's not anything.
The culture's
concrete.
there,
Okay.
right? The policy just needs to catch up.
Okay.
That's the way I would get it, right?
And I think in many ways, that's the same lived equality versus legal equality
Right.
we see
Yes.
across Lakewood, that the laws are now catching up to a welcoming and embracing culture.
And I want you to repeat that phrase again, and just, because I think it's a really good one as we look to ask this group of people what they might need to do in the future. I think that that's a great catchphrase to keep out there.
It's been really helpful for me to sort of think of this in terms of the journey we have for fully welcoming communities for LGBT individuals. There is the legal equality. For example, the news headline all the time is marriage equality. There are a bundle of very important rights that come with marriage equality. And that is a great achievement when we achieve marriage equality. But that doesn't necessarily change the lived equality of a city or a state that has marriage equality until we change the hearts and minds and allow for greater acceptance. So the two walk hand in hand. Oftentimes we see changing the legal equality first significantly helps the lived equality. Marriage polling shows that states that didn't have marriage equality before, once they get it, the acceptance of the LGBT community skyrockets, which is great. Ironically though, there are other communities that have a very welcoming culture and just don't have the legal protections in place. Going back to what Councilman O'Leary said, 8 out of 10 Ohioans don't know it's legal to be fired in the state of Ohio unless there are local protections in place. That assumption perhaps fuels that disconnect. So we want the laws to match the lived and the lived to match the laws.
We made a good segue because I think we're going to ask for some questions or some comments here from the folks that are in attendance. But I wanted, before we segue to that, I wanted to say if you all had to share one or two things with this group of what they specifically could do to be more welcoming or take action, or a suggestion that you may have for them, what might that be?
Oh, everyone's looking at me. All right, I'll go first. I know that small business majority's perspective, we're certainly very aware that small business owners are predominantly concerned with their everyday. They're trying to run their business, keep their business thriving, keep our economy thriving. So in terms of advocacy, one, educating them on the issues is always a really important step, but it's hard to pull them away from that necessary time. And then secondly, giving them the tools so that they can adequately advocate on their own behalf is really important. But that also is time consuming. So I know that one of my larger takeaways in terms of being a representative of our organization and the small business voice on issues like this is to let you know that we're a resource. We do a lot of educational components that is very business specific. Most of the time when we do these business events, we did a statewide teletown hall where we randomly dialed all these business owners across the state. And when we let them chime in for questions, every single one of them, if they weren't asking, how can I get more involved, which is a great question, they were like, how much is this going to cost me? That's always the common question. Like, we want to do the right thing, but just tell me what the dollar amount is. And small business majority, when we did that polling, we asked the small business owners who had those policies in place, what is the economic impact for you? And they said, and I quote, nothing or next to nothing to have a workplace non-discrimination policy and be inclusive. So in terms of what we can do to be an asset to the business community, specifically to the small business community, if you need assistance in finding your legislators, being able to know what the issues are, what the current status of the law is, and Equality Ohio is a great resource for this as well. But we're certainly there to kind of do the heavy lifting and do all the things that are really going to consume your time, so that all you have to do is be a face of the issue, and be your face and your voice of the issue. We just want to take away any of those hurdles that would prevent you from being able to make a substantial change.
Not too long ago, moved to Lakewood from Washington, D.C., and as an openly gay man, I find it very welcoming. One issue that you haven't touched upon, though, is an important aspect, I think, of many LGBT members, and that is their faith, their religion. And I'm a practicing Catholic, and certainly as an openly gay man in the Catholic Church, I've witnessed personally and have seen others, you know, discriminated because of our sexual orientation. I've been very lucky to find St. Luke Church here in Lakewood, which is incredibly opening and accepting, and so I'm lucky for that. I know that there are a number of things beyond just the Catholic Church, with other religions, other faith denominations, where LGBT people do not feel that open. And some of it may be just because of stereotypes. I mean, if you would ask the average gay or lesbian about the Catholic Church, they're going to say it's not welcoming, period. Whereas when you're looking at individual churches or individual leaders of churches, you find that it is accepted. So my question to you is, has there ever been an effort, or should there be an effort, for some sort of interfaith dialogue, interfaith forum, to bring a lot of the community churches together to talk about this and how we can play a greater part in the faith of our families, but also the faith of the community?
Speak more to this, but I also wanted to share, as we were looking at this panel, we realized that was one of the topics that we said, where do we put faith in this? Where do we put several other topics? And so it's, I think, a perfect opportunity to launch this as one of the other forums that happen here in Lakewood, because I think that it would be a great topic.
I think that's great, and you have just touched upon what Michelle as well. It's such a broad topic, but it's so important. And I just want to briefly share that Equality Ohio is specifically focusing on faith conversations. We have a statewide faith director, Ms. Susie Ubagi. She's based out of Toledo, but she travels all over the state. They have a faith council, and it's a group of faith leaders who have committed to improving LGBT equality across the state and having welcoming conversations within their congregations. And not everyone started at a welcoming place. That's the important part. These have been conversations that have been building over years to make congregations more accepting and more welcoming, and those conversations are continuing. Specifically, this year's focus is on denominations and congregations that have been more traditionally neutral to LGBT issues or frankly opposed to them. So those conversations are ongoing, and I would love to connect with you afterwards to put you in touch with our organizer.
So I guess the question is, what can we do as a municipal level and at a common pleas level to help protect LGBT rights and help enforce the rights, not only at a criminal standard, but also at a civil standard? I do wrongful termination, and I've done based on religion, based on color, and based on gender and weight and sex, but you know, as you brought up, we're not, LGBT is not a protected class. So what can we do about that, and where can we start, and how can a municipal court level help those who are victims of hate crimes and those who fall kind of below and are kind of forgotten? So what can we do, and how can we help? Thank you. And by the way, this has been great. This is really knowledgeable and very informative. So thank you very much.
I was going to say, I might want to nerd out on this a little bit, because as a law student, I actually did this really long thesis on gender identity in federal court systems. So although I don't have a very specific answer to municipal courts and their roles in these kinds of things, because so I'm sure you can understand, whether you're a lawyer or whether you're a judge, you're usually strapped to the law that you're given, and then you apply it. So usually that change, unfortunately, has to come from legislators first. So thank you to those that we have here in the room. But I think one thing that's really important, what this kind of points out, is that from a federal perspective, what you see in terms of how we're defining these issues and how they're being interpreted in courts is there's a lot of inconsistency. So what does sexual orientation mean? What does sex mean? It's not the same universally, and that's also an issue. So, while I certainly don't want to take any kind of position in saying, what judges should or shouldn't do, but being very careful in terms of, if somebody is raising a claim based on their interpretation of sex under the law and how they're defining sex perhaps maybe as gender, or sexual orientation is sometimes inclusive of gender identity. I think that's something that our court system should be incredibly sensitive about in terms of how they're adjudicating.
Personal decision to be inclusive. Don't assume on spouses. Don't assume on pronouns. Don't assume on gender identity. You make it cases that in where you have a transgender individual coming to you to do a name change proceeding. One of the best things that you can do is be an advocate for that individual, make them feel comfortable, make them feel welcomed, and just make the process very easy for them. That's something that we have worked as advocates, and I'm looking at Jake Nash here, advocate extraordinaire. We have worked with our judges in Cuyahoga County specifically to be aware of this issue and make that process as streamlined and easy as possible for folks. So personal decisions and how you treat everybody can always be within our control. The law is not always within our control. Work to change it, and then work to know your boundaries within it.
Cindy, do you have a question in the back?
I do. Cindy Einhaus. Speaking of definitions, sometimes now instead of LGBT, you see LGBTQ. Can you address what that means?
Sure. Q, sometimes it refers to queer, sometimes it refers to questioning. Questioning is being inclusive of a person, questioning their gender identity or their sexual orientation. And queer is an umbrella term, and it is a reclaimed word. So I want us to approach this word gently. You don't want to identify someone else as queer. Let a person reclaim and claim that identity for themselves. But usually we see it in the context of an individual who claims the identity of not conforming with what society says a gender expectation should be or a sexual orientation expectation should be. So it's more of an umbrella term, but one that we try to use as advocates as often as possible because it extends the inclusivity.
And we actually we debated a bit about adding Q when we made the flyer of add the Q and then see if it sparks interest, and we'll get some other, and then we had quite a bit of conversation and said, we're going to remove it from the flyer, but we knew we wanted to have the conversation here.
Hi, I'm Dan O'Malley. I'm a resident of Lakewood and a board member of Equality Ohio and of Cleveland Stonewall Democrats as well. I'm really proud to live in Lakewood, and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else as a gay person. I think, as has been mentioned several times tonight, we have an extraordinarily welcoming culture here in Lakewood. And yet there are instances in which our policies just haven't caught up with that. In 2004, the state of Ohio, voters in Ohio voted almost 2-1 to ban same-sex marriage. In Lakewood, voters voted almost 2-1 against that ban. One of the highest margins in the entire state, if not the highest, against the ban on same-sex marriage. We elected a first openly gay member of council here in 2007, Nikki Antonio, who was then the first openly gay state legislator elected in 2010. But it's remarkable to think that in that same community that voted so overwhelmingly against the ban on same-sex marriage in 2004, the year before, our mayor had to erect a separate flagpole at City Hall to fly the gay pride flag because there were so many people who did not want on the same flagpole as the American flag. And just a couple of years before that, our council voted against domestic partner benefits. We've had a lot of victories here, but my point in bringing this up is that the reason that those defeats happened is because I think that welcoming, wonderful culture and community that we have here, as we see policies being proposed that will make it a better place, like we have happening here, thanks to Sam and Cindy and a lot of others, be vocal, take action, make sure that that happens, because it's so important, I think, you know, we have this forum here tonight, is Lakewood a welcoming community? You know, to put a period at the end of that sentence, and Lakewood is a welcoming community, I think has so much to do with the policy that we need to make sure we see through. So thank you.
I have a kindergarten who's identified as transgender, and we used to live until January in a small southeast Michigan town where people would laugh behind their hands or would stare or ask rude questions. And since we've been here in October, our little one they've been fiercely proactive at the school, and whether it's this library or McDonald's or Giant Eagle or wherever it is, nobody cares. And we have felt so much safer and so much welcome here for that little child because we want him to have her, even I get the pronouns screwed up, so we want her to be happy and confident and be able to be proud, and we feel like this is going to be her home for a very long time. So take that.
Hi, my name is Chris Overholt. I'm an educator at the high school here in Lakewood. I'm not a Lakewood resident, but I'm considering being one, and this forum, I guess, hit home to me personally in that regard. But more importantly, as an educator, there are, I think, some great things going on, you know, just in terms of the school district. Just this last year, same-sex partner benefits became part of our structure. We have paternity leave. We have, you know, the ability to leave now for adoption, as my partner and I are looking to adopt a child. So those things I think are really positive, but at the same time, I read emails from our HR department that read the Lakewood City School District does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, disability, age, religion, ancestry, or genetic information in its programs and activities, and provides equal access to Boy Scouts and other designated youth groups. And I can't help but notice that sexual orientation and or gender identity are left out of that equation. And it's interesting working with young people, it's not just myself that notices that. As policies are posted in the school, students have come up and said, you know, like, do I matter? Like, why am I not included? And, you know, sometimes not including somebody is just as much of an okay, I guess, to discriminate against them when they see a list, this sense of not including them. So that's one thing. So in terms of policy, I think great strides, still quite a ways to go, and we're working on it. The other comment earlier was that the culture is there, but the policy is not, and needs to catch up. And I think that's true to an extent, but I also feel like it's really easy for us to say that. We are working really hard with our youth at the high school in particular, with this great group of individuals. Some of the students are here, our core leaders, and we've been very blessed to partner with a nonprofit organization called Dare to Care, which we have representatives here tonight as well, which looks to really address not just identity issues, but specifically those to the LGBTQ community, and should try to prevent bullying in the schools. We're really proud of Club Identity that Sarah mentioned here, that we started up a couple years ago, and our second cohort is looking for, you know, the next project that they can take on. What we want to, I think, see more of is it not just being a club where the students that are LGBT friendly, that 20 to 25 kids, show up routinely once a month or twice a month. So I think that's something to think about. You know, I was thinking about my college experience and how most colleges now require some sort of diversity component, and I would really love for, you know, us in terms of a school district to, you know, instill that sort of, I think, policy or type of class with students as well. Lastly, I want to thank you because we were at Ranger 360's parent night a couple weeks ago, and that's how I found out about this event. One of the parents had put me in touch with Ms. Einhaus and some other folks who sent me an email, and I was able to invite these students. My question is, what are, I guess, you know, what is Lakewood Alive, or what are all of you doing to make the students more a part of this conversation?
When we've spoken with specifically youth entrepreneurs, one of the largest areas in which there's room for growth is in the concept of mentorship. So, you know, since I'm not a resident of Lakewood, I don't want to presume anything, but, you know, perhaps that's an area to explore in terms of, you know, we're creating an environment of inclusiveness, but what are we doing to demonstrate to our students in high school on how they can start a job here in Lakewood, or how to get a job, how to start a business, how they can become productive citizens. You know, are we registering them to vote the second they turn 18? So are we interacting them with our local community? There's a lot of ways that you can make youth really interested and invested in their communities in ways that is complete. I don't want to say it's irrelevant to the schools, it's certainly not. But it's
in preparation for life when school is over. And, you know, like I said, I hate outsider, not knowing what those kinds of programs are. If somebody knows what they are and can share that, I would certainly think that that is a great area to explore. So if you have business owners in this area, you know, maybe connect with your schools, create a program.
Hi everybody, I'm JT Newfer, and I've been a Lakewood resident for 14 years. I am running for City Council in Ward 3 as an openly gay man, so it's an exciting opportunity. I've worked really hard with Lakewood, for Lakewood, and just very excited to be a resident of the community. This past year I got involved in the PTA Council, and we've got some outstanding students, so I echo all the accolades to Lakewood students. But I'm interested, Maureen, to find out if when it's a time for you, I've seen a lot of pictures on my Facebook about the father-daughter dance that Lakewood posts. So is that an opportunity for a lesbian couple who are married and committed to have children? Are you included in that father-daughter dance? And if that's not an opportunity, then I would challenge some of the school board to think about making more inclusivity.
We have had some conversations about using more inclusive language in that father-daughter dance, and we certainly had more of those conversations given the demographic and the makeup of our school in Roosevelt. So what I would like to defer is my wife, Kelly, here.
No pressure, Kelly.
She probably has some things to say
about
about
if you would
this.
like.
I'm Kelly. The flyer said father-daughter dance, and to be inclusive, in very small letters, it said, or a male figure. Well, we know what that's called. It's the father-daughter dance. And some of our friends don't have dads either, for other situations. And they were able to bring their grandpa or their uncle, and we could have done the same. But it was almost a personal stand for me and Maureen. And it's happening again. And some of our friends that are here attended the father-daughter dance. I'm sure had a great time. And I was so happy that they got to do that. I think if the language were more inclusive, I think that our daughters would have went, we would have felt comfortable going, and they would have had a great time, you know. So I'm hoping that that language will change. It's good for everybody. You know, I know personally, our PTA in Roosevelt is, instead of what do they have now? The father-daughter dance is sponsored by All Pro Dads. Great, we want male engagement. Please, make more males. Show up to PTA, that's great. But for us at Roosevelt, we're kind of having the conversation, is it All Pro Dads, or are we gonna think of a name that's more inclusive? What about Me and My Guy? They have great uncles, you know, and many of you are great male figures. Can't we just have more inclusive language that says, me and my guy are going to the dance? Maybe me and my guy are father, instead of fathers walk to school, their uncles walking to school, you know. So, but if it's me and my guy, or something of that nature, I just think it's more inclusive for all of our members.
My children share the school with Kelly Maureen's children at Roosevelt, and I am on the PTA as well, and we have decided to not support All Pro Dad this next year because of exactly what you said, because the religious nature behind it and the views that they have taken on that. So we know that we have a very diverse community in many ways, and we feel it's our job as parents, gay, straight, to raise our children to be tolerant and to make sure that we're inclusive for not only them, but their children as well. So that is, you know, something that we feel important in our small little community of Roosevelt.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on, although I hate to end the conversation because it's been so wonderful. I would like to thank the panel for participating in this dialogue tonight, in LakewoodAlive for having the capacity to have this type of activity within their organization that is such a small staff and they do so many things. And Jim Crawford for having us here, hosting us here at the library. Again, I hope that you will fill out the little card out there and tell us some more ideas. Tell us if you'd like to get involved in some way or another, either on the Community Engagement Committee, LakewoodAlive, with any of these organizations here. Thank you so much for participating.